Growing up, my family was pretty typical. I wish I could say I lived some extraordinary childhood, or went on some amazing adventures for you. But I would be lying. I came up with my older brother, and my parents in our modest house in the suburbs. My brother would regularly wow the community each full weekend with his athletic prowess, and would go on to have my niece, and become everyone's finance guy. As for my parents, they loved us, and did their best to be sure we had every opportunity in life that they hadn't. That's not to say we had everything we ever wanted, but they worked very hard to put us both in a position to achieve everything we could have ever wanted to. Frankly, this sense of commonness went completely unnoticed by me until my first year of college. When I was confronted with needing to pick my major, I realized I had no real passion to speak of. As you might imagine, this caused me a great deal of stress. Having absolutely no direction in life, but knowing that at 18 years old I had to make a decision that would define my entire adulthood. It's funny, I couldn't legally drink at the time, but I sure could sign the dotted line, to be buried under thousands upon thousands of dollars for years. I spent my first term taking the general courses that we were required to have what the university marketed as a well-rounded education. This bought me a little more time to find some direction to head with my life, so I took the opportunity. As winter break approached, the fact that I had really not gotten any closer to a decision was a crushing weight on my shoulders. As I climbed onto the train to come home to my parents for the holidays, I dreaded all the questions they would ask. There was one thing I was genuinely looking forward to, though. My mom had called me a few days earlier to inform me that my Aunt Emily would be staying with us for the holiday season. We didn't get to see much of her growing up, but that didn't stop her from making a huge impact on me each precious time we did. My aunt was frequently on long trips to faraway places for her work. As a kid, I didn't exactly understand what it was she did. But now I have come to understand that she is an archaeologist. As I got older, my growing understanding for what she did definitely gave me a better appreciation for the fossils and flint works she would always bring as gifts. The crisp, cold air sliced at my exposed skin as I hauled my bags off of the train. Loud bellowing whistles called out from the iron beast to sound its next set of passengers to board it. A bit overwhelmed from all the commotion, I slipped around the station to scan the parking lot for my brother. Him I was expecting to see waiting to whisk me back to our childhood home. His wasn't the face I found greeting me, though. There, in a very loud orange parka, was my aunt, jumping up and down, beckoning me over to her. With newfound excitement at this unexpected change in plans, I bounded over to hug her. On the drive home, I filled her in on all the animosity I had towards having to decide my future by the time I returned for the next term. She jumped at the opportunity to convince me to follow in her footsteps and join her once my studies were completed. Strong points were made by her, from getting to travel to unique places to leaving a permanent stamp in history with unique narrative-shifting finds. I spent the remainder of my time with my family mulling the idea over, and found myself drawn to it more and more. My aunt and the wonderful stories of unique discoveries she had trickled into my mind over the years won out. On my return to my university, I proudly proclaimed my new focus. I felt like a whole new person. The power finding a passion gave me was transcendent. I found myself engaging at the forefront of discussions and historical debates for the next 5 years of my education. My social life bloomed as well, allowing me my choice of friendships and romances. However, I always had in the back of my mind that my choice of career would mean living a nomadic lifestyle. I opted to avoid deep emotional connections to reduce the emotional toll on myself each time I would have to pack up and move on to a new place in the future. Shortly after graduation, my lively aunt managed to secure a spot for me on her dig team for that coming season. I don't want you making the same mistakes we did. So for now, I'll just tell you we were investigating some caves we believe were tied to a very prominent and early human civilization. This being my first real opportunity to hone my skills and find something unique under my own name. And not as some university-recommended field work that I would have to write endless essays on, had me in a boisterous mood. I stepped out of the small charter flight we had to take into the dig site with excitement coursing through my veins, wanting to impress the others on the team though. I held it back and took in my surroundings. Dry desert air whipped up small swirls of sand and dust up off of the dry cracked soil. The pale blue of the sky was illuminated by the blistering noon sun hanging high in the sky. Two rocky plateaus jutted out of the otherwise flat landscape, as though they were fighting with everything they had to resist the effects of time. The smaller of the two is where our cave was found, my aunt chimed, breaking me out of my almost trance-like state. All we know so far for sure is that something we believe to be ritualistic in nature sits just inside the entrance, she continued. When do we go in? I asked, doing a poor job of masking my excitement. Soon enough, but first we need to examine the exterior, she finished, before bounding in the direction of the cave with her equipment in tow. I hustled to grab my bags and computer equipment out of the storage compartment and joined her and the rest of the team towards the site. Approaching the cave was one of the most unique moments in my life. The evidence of human occupation to the untrained eye outside of the cave was little to none at best. But to a team of people who had spent years of their lives hoping to find a unique place like this, it was like being a kid in a candy store. The first major find was from my aunt herself. Leading to the entrance of the cave was a row of stones. 10 on each side, approximately 6 feet apart, leading to the large boulder that blocked the entrance of the cave. I set out to scan them with my digital imaging equipment to see if there were any carvings or markings on them, to my excitement. And then curiosity, there was. Each stone seemed to depict small human-like creatures walking in the direction of the cave. Most were holding cups or bowls, as though they were offerings, the working theory for the depictions to the team at the time. But one, and perhaps the most peculiar one, was dragging what we believe was an adult human behind him. Small groves were also found about 3 feet above ground level around the opening of the cave, although further investigation led to no definitive conclusion as to why they had been there. It took 3 of us to carefully roll the large blockage out of the way of the entrance. Once we had donned our safety gear and started making our way into the cave was when things really got interesting. The air was instantly damp and cool in the cavern, a huge shift from the environment just outside of the cave system. The walls of the cave were covered in a crimson hue, definitely placed onto the original rock face artificially, about 40 feet in. Images appeared on the walls of the cave, similar to the ones shown on the stones outside. They seemed to be leading us deeper into the cave. The walls began to narrow and funnel us into a channel just wide enough for each member of the dig team to enter single file. Another 20 feet ahead of us, the passage opened into a small room with a large stone slab sat centered under a large image. And a deep brown outlined on the crimson wall was a horrific image of one of those small creatures. In its mouth was what we hypothesized to be a child. This could possibly be a temple for human sacrifice, my aunt stated, too excited for the macabre subject. The rest of the team stayed silent, as did I. No one had been in this space in thousands of years. The intensity of the situation weighed on me as I began scanning the walls of the space. As the images became more clear with the laser data, I could begin to understand a narrative that was being told from the pictures. The people who inhabited this area were in fact bringing children here as human sacrifices. As I informed the group of that fact, the mood seemed to settle and cement into a more somber experience. We knew finding human remains was very likely at this point. Just as I had finished explaining my finds to the group, a low deep hum began bellowing from all sides of the cave. Confused and nervous faces shot back and forth at each other, as though everyone was searching for an easy explanation to the phenomenon. Timidly, the team's guide chirped up to say the area has been known to be geologically active. We readily accepted that explanation, and got back to work. I leaned down to inspect a small carving on the center altar in the space slowly. I felt the cool dry stone with my hand, gliding my fingertips along the ridges following the pattern into its center. As my touch approached the pinnacle of the carved spiral, I could feel the energy in the air begin to grow, and the hair on the back of my neck begin to stand. A quick warm pulse rushed through me as I met the center. The cavern began vibrating, and a deep drumming sound began billowing up from every direction. The temperature in the cave dropped dramatically. I could even see my breath despite it easily being over 100 degrees outside the entrance. As the drumming grew louder and louder, the room began to glow with a deep amber glow, and all of our lights went out. The room fell silent at that moment. Only the sound of our heavy, anxious breathing filled my ears. What happened next will be carved into the recesses of my mind like the symbols on the cave walls for eternity. Drumming began to pound my eardrums. Loud screeching seemed to come from behind the altar, as many small shadows shot around the room, with the sound of small feet scuttling. I could only slightly make out the build of the monstrosities, that seemed to materialize from some deep ancient void long forgotten by humanity. They were an inky black color with dog-like features twisted into the stuff of nightmares. Their jaws snapped and snarled as they moved swiftly. That's when I heard the first screams coming from the members of the team. The painful cries came from them, one after the other, as the small monstrosities crawled out of whatever hell they had been summoned from. My eyes darted around the space only to see blood painting the walls and my teammates being attacked. The sound of bones snapping and soft tissues ripping rang through the air like the melody floating over the ever-beating drums. Quickly my thoughts shifted to my aunt. Managing to somehow go unbothered by the evil in the room, I moved back to find her. "Well, what are those things?" I managed to sputter through my anxiety. "I don't know, but we have to stop them from getting out," she said, seeming to have found a second wind of adrenaline. My aunt slowly made her way over to the large boulder that had previously sealed off the entrance of the cave, and began trying to push it in front of the opening, grunting in pain as she applied force. "What about the others?" I cried out to her, jumping to my feet at the sound of the creatures coming closer. "What about everyone else if we don't move this rock? Now get over here and help me," she asserted. We both put every ounce of strength we could muster into pushing the stone back into its original resting place, and just as the sound of the drumming began to grow closer and hissing and screeching began echoing out of the cave, the boulder gave and slipped into the entrance. We ran to the plane that was waiting for us, and my aunt climbed in to get us out of the situation. I have since shifted my career into research that is done much more comfortably from my home office. We never shared the location of the cave as being significant with anyone in hopes to avoid anyone suffering the same tragedy we had. Today, however, on my desk I found an article a colleague sent me. The article read, "Local man identifies evidence of early human habitation in Tennessee cave system." The image on the entrance was the same spiral that I had seen on the altar.